Fellow Toastmasters and guests. If there are some of you who are not Toastmasters and are visiting for the first time, I want to welcome you to this special session, this special workshop called Micro Storytelling for Effective Virtual Training. My name is Ruben Bastian. I will be your moderator today. Just a quick reminder, the session is being recorded and as well, you will have a chance to access it later at a later date online through the District 60 website as well. So what are we here for? I'm here to introduce our speaker today, who is Roman Smolak. Roman is a DTM and a member for 10 plus years of the Speaking from Experience Advanced Toastmasters Club. He completed a 22-year career as a technology sales executive, and in his line of work, he made cold calls, delivered elevator pitches, and closed thousands of sales deals. Roman earned his master's degrees in social studies from York University and a bachelor's degrees in psychology from U of T. After retiring from sales, he completed his master's certificate in adult training and development at Zurich School of Business. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you know the one thing that successful sales executives and trainers have in common? Well, let me tell you. It is that they love stories. But there's a significant difference between stories and micro stories. When you're telling micro stories, it has a huge benefits for framing content in a creative and engaging fashion. Micro stories are precise, impactful, they resonate intellectually, emotionally, and best of all, they inspire people to take action. So now there's only one question to ask. Are you ready to become more powerful and more impactful? Fellow Toastmasters, without further ado, let's hear from Roman as he tells you how you can deliver more engaging and interactive presentation. So please help me welcome, with your virtual hands, Roman Smolak for Micro Storytelling for effective virtual training. Roman, take it away.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Thank you, Kathy, for popping up that hand. I see it. Excellent. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to this conference workshop. I hope everyone's been enjoying the event so far. I have been. I've included some nuggets of, let's say, wisdom from Patricia Fripp in this workshop. So we'll just briefly point to that. I hope everyone will be following with the handout. There's a link in the chat if you don't have that. And those who are following this workshop on the District 60 television video page, the link to the handout is down in the notes. Without further ado, let me start this with the agenda, and let's see what we're going to talk about today. One of the first things I need to make clear is, what is the purpose of training? What is the goal of training? And you'll see in a moment why that's very important in order to define what it is that a training is trying to do. And then we'll delve deeper into training goals. And then we'll start to see how to apply those goals into a micro story. And that's when we'll start to talk about how to design a micro story. We'll do a case study where I interview someone who's attended a previous workshop that I delivered and where I used micro stories, and we'll get some feedback and sharing of the experience of how effective a micro story is. We'll have a Q&A, so anytime you have a question, we're going to ask you to type it into the chat. Ruben will take care of those. And we'll end with a summary. We talked about the handout. Okay, good. All right, so if we can, Esther, our producer at the dials, please launch the first poll. And just tell us, pick one of these, who you think you are today. And we've got, I believe, about 10 or 12 of you who have joined us today. So I'm very interested to find out who is here. So we've got one or two novices, and we got intermediate people, people who've probably done workshops before and are looking for tips and tricks. Oh, we have one advanced. Excellent. And I think we can close the poll. Beautiful. Okay, there's the results. So you can see we're sort of trending on the advanced, and this is in an intermediate type workshop. I'll make sure that we'll take questions from those who are novices, just getting introduced. One of the key points of wanting to do this at the conference is to encourage people who've never done a workshop before to actually get into it. And you're going to get tips and tricks on how to do one, how to organize it, and how to ask a really good question so that you're interacting with the audience, whether it's through a poll, through a chat, or through live discussion. And of course, for those who are advanced, you'll see some really, really deep techniques in order to do that. And the first technique, obviously, is that handout. So you're going to get some information from that. Esther, if you can launch the second poll, and I'll just get the slide up. There we go. So what are you expecting to learn from this workshop today? How to create a microstory, how to design a training session, how to make a training session interactive, or do you want to hear recollections of my sales history? All right, so, okay, good. What the microstory is all about. Oh, somebody does want to hear about my sales history. Interesting. So we're Microstory and the virtual training. And just for those who are concerned whether I'm going to delve too deeply into my history, I will not. I'm just put that up as a little bit of a humor. Well, I'll have to have another workshop for that, or visit Speaking from Experience, where I can socially share my past history, or send me an email. We can do a Zoom call. Right, so we're here for the exact two reasons: to understand the microstory and understand the training, how to do it for virtual training. And we'll shut the poll down. Now, before we get too far into this, let's take a look at what a microstory is, but I'm not going to give you a definition. I'm going to ask you a question that I was asked yesterday, or last week when we did this for my club. What is an anecdote? And for me to hear back from you, this is what we want you to do. We want you to type your response in the chat. So type into the chat. And if you can't, if it doesn't pop up, just raise your hand. Ruben will unmute you, or you can unmute yourself over here, even put on the video, and we'll get your response. So type into the chat, what do you think, in a couple of words, what is an anecdote? And I was asked, what is the difference between an anecdote and a microstory? And it's a very good question. And I had to do very good, yes. A funny story. An anecdote can be a funny story. Emotional.
So I see a lot of humor that's brought in. So Kathy has mentioned a story that reflects and that you're going about, usually humor related. And as well, as you mentioned, Letitia has mentioned an anecdote with a funny story. We have emotional story from Stephen, an interesting story with wisdom. So essentially,
Yes, let's talk about that for a second. A story, an anecdote with wisdom, often, and you may remember this from childhood, is considered a fable, right? So that's that wisdom. It's that little learning at the end. Well, all these point to something that's very similar, that the anecdote has an ending. It has something at the end. It's very short, but it has something at the end that is a bit of a conclusion. And what you're going to see here today, and what my goal is to use a microstory, which I'm distinguishing from an anecdote, although it is, it's very similar. The microstory has no ending, so to speak. It's meant to open up the ideas, the discussion, the reflection in a training. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about this later on. Is that okay, Ruben? Yeah, we got the big finger. So let me start with a story. Anne is a district program quality director. And as a program quality director, one of her responsibilities in her role is to organize the club officer training. And this year with the COVID, she's experiencing some serious challenges. The district numbers are going down. So she needs to organize her club officer training, and especially for the VPPRs, to be able to attract more guests. And if you attract more guests, the assumption is the guests will convert to members. So she thinks, who can I get to do this training? And she thinks of Maxine. Maxine is a VPPR of a club whose numbers are up, it's thriving, and they seem to be have a very vibrant, informative website. So Maxine, can you facilitate the second VPPR training for club executives in the TLI in January? And Maxine starts to think. So I'm going to ask you, what should Maxine focus the training on? Should she focus on what VPPRs are not doing today and what they can be doing? Should she be focused on what the role of the VPPR is and description of the responsibilities? Or should she train the VPPRs to review the purpose of the Toastmaster public relations focus? What is the meaning behind public relations within Toastmasters? So we have a poll and we'd like to hear from you. Which one of these, A, B, or C, in this order, do you think is important? So we've got 2 already for A. All right. So we got most of the people are for A. We got a couple for the responsibilities and 1 to look into the public relations. Well, there is nothing changed there. There is no real right answer. And I'm going to lean towards A in this workshop, only because I want to show you how to do something that's an alternative to the B track and the C track. So let's look at those. Can we get rid of the polls? Excellent. And most of you have already figured out where we're going in this workshop anyways. I can't get rid of my poll. Okay, so B, what's B all about? And we'll just kind of go through this. Well, Toastmasters International provides a training manual to those who are going to train and provide a deck of slides, 19 to be exact. 19 slides in order to train the role and the responsibilities of the VPPR. Now, I have a question for you, and you can put this in the chat. What are the drawbacks of lecture-based training? Sorry, Laurie, there was none of the above. That's interesting. We'll talk to you later about that. Yeah, they become dull, lose people's attention, mechanical, not interesting, right? You basically are listening to the sage on the stage telling you one way what they think, and not really asking about what you're thinking. Antoinette, no interaction, boring. Did I miss any, Ruben?
No, that is pretty much. So people may not feel motivated to act.
Right, there's no action involved in the lecture-based training. Very good. All right, let's move on. And of course, the blah, blah, blah. All right, so what we can do as an option, and what I'm recommending so that we could move on, put all the information you need the people to know as background in an aid, job aid, resource aid, whatever you want to call it. And in the handout that you have today, you have links to resources. All right, let's look at C. Review the purpose of the public relations. Well, if you go to the Toastmaster International website, you'll see that there's information for each of the executive roles. And it just so happens that the VPPR resources is the largest available of all the executives. There's a stream of information, and I've actually done this and delivered a VPPR training based on just looking at these pages. This manual has 55 pages. There's a brand manual with 34 pages. There is a chock load of information here. Now, in addition, I just looked it up. I believe this year or late last year, they released an evaluation form to self-evaluate. And you as a trainer could send this out to your participants to fill out, and they can circle where they think they are. You can determine what the gap is. And there we go. Isn't that fun? I like that so much. I'm going to do it again so you didn't miss that. There we go. And that's where you want to train. You want to fill that gap. You want to get your training to fill that gap so that you get your objectives and you fill that gap. And that's a standard way of designing a training, right? Find out what the gap is and train for it. Well, guess what? You could put all that information and links into that handout that we talked about earlier, right? So those two things. Oh, okay, let's ask this question. What happens to the brain when it's fed tedious information? What happens to the people sitting in the workshop and they're just going blah, 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 blah. Here's the tedious information from the Toastmasters workshop, just as I'm droning on right now. What happens to your head? Stop smiling, folks. Yes, brain shuts down. People want to leave. They want to look at their Blackberries. No one's left yet. That's great. Anybody else? What happens to the brain? This is really kind of important. There's neuroscience now around this, around what we're going to be talking about today. The brain, yes, if it's not paying attention, it cannot process the information. Has anybody read a book and you're on a page and you get to the end of the page and you realize you have no idea what was on the page, what you just spent the last 20 minutes reading? I hate it. I got my master's degree, and I think half the time was spent rereading what I'd fallen asleep in the middle of. Well, exactly. This procedures or these techniques for training, they may be valuable in certain circumstances, and maybe in the club officer training 1, that's what you would do. You would follow one of these processes, techniques, methods. But I think there's something more effective, and you're going to see that really today. And that's asking them, what are they not doing? So let's look at option A. Maxine is thinking, okay, what am I going to do? How do I set up the training to discover what are they not doing? And she says, well, I need a handy dandy flow chart, a flow chart that maybe somebody else prepares, somebody who's a professional in this industry and is offering this flow chart for free. And the link is in your handout. And in addition to that, she has a member in her club, Stacy. Stacy is a marketing expert. And Stacy has a couple of tidbit information that will help Maxine figure out how to design her training course. Are you interested to find out what Maxine's going to say? Yes, good, good, good. Stacy, what Stacy's going to say? Stacy is saying, look, why don't you review what they're doing now? Review their club websites. They're already doing something or not doing, right? Some people's websites are horrendous if you have a quick look at that. And I've looked at maybe 30 different websites. So we're going to look at websites. We're going to, from that manual, we're going to look at this page called values and try to understand what the meaning of values are and how are values portrayed on our websites. Thank you, Stacy. That's very brilliant. Oh, Stacy has another suggestion. Why not take this page, this handout from Toastmasters, and I don't have the link to that. You can search that on your own. Features, functions, benefits, and values. Have them look at this and understand how to build a value proposition statement so that it is reflected on their web page. All right. More. Stacy says, take a look if the values that are established in the Toastmaster district and the district websites are reflected on the club website. And if those values are confirmed in the meetings. Very interesting. Something I'm sure not many clubs have done. And finally, she said, have you looked at the website from the perspective of the guest? Think of the guest reading your website, and is it going to be inviting? Is it telling the proper information? Is it reflecting the same values that we saw in the Toastmaster International and the district website? So basically take a look at it from the perspective of the guest. All right, all this together, Stacy says, is what builds a brand, a club brand. And the club brand communicates with the guest. Excuse me. So if people are looking to decrease their anxiety over public speaking, does the club brand reflect that value? That's just an example. So Stacy's given us a lot of great ideas. And of course, Maxine's going, well, how do I set up my workshop? Thank you. These are all great ideas, but it sounds to me like I'm just going down the lecture road. And Stacy says, no, there's one thing that will help you. And that's asking, why are VPPRs not doing this? And when you ask this question in whatever training design that you're doing, why are my participants not doing the objective, the goal of the training? Why are they not doing it? Then you start to understand where your training focus needs to be. All right, so let me ask you, you had this little micro story. What is the goal of the training? Why are, I don't want you to ask that. I want, oh, we're going to, we'll not skip this. Let me, before we get to the chat, let me just explain. Once you understand where you're going with the training, you'll start to see what activities you want to do to support the learning. And it's only then that you can start to design the microstory. We're going to talk about that later on, but this is very important. You need to understand the goal of the training and map it, kind of just list it all out, and it's going to help you design the microstory. And once you start working on the microstory, you'll start to figure out which of the activities you want to do in your training. All right, so here's my question. What is the goal of Maxine's training? Just type it into the chat. There's another question I might ask you. What kind of activities can Maxine organize for her participants for this training?
I see. You're starting to have some answers. So some people are suggesting that maybe the goal of the VPR is to discuss what the VPs are not doing. Perhaps it's to attract audience that are interested in Toastmasters. Maybe after the training, the trainees will do what they've learned and what they've been informed about.
Very good, Kathy. That's good. Yes. Tracy, nice. You want to draw their interest. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, and Stefan is suggesting that maybe it's get them to think about objectives in terms of guests.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Those are all excellent. And this was a kind of a trick question. So we'll go back to our flow chart. We'll take those suggestions and others that are available. I said it's a trick question because I gave you basically most of the activities in the example that Stacy talked about. So let's take those examples and we'll look at a couple more that you provided me, and we'll see if we can't put them into these 4 categories that is provided to us by this flow chart. And this flow chart is, I'm going to explain, is from Kathy Moore, and we're going to talk about her in a second here. All right, let's put those training activities, the possible training activities, into this chart. Now, knowledge is pretty straightforward. It's just simple, dry facts, right? Black and white. And you can train on those, and we have been, if we've all attended higher education, and we know exactly what happens to our brains when someone is just telling us knowledge, 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 knowledge. Skills is actually doing something. And although you can see that a value proposition and feature function benefit is partly knowledge, how to develop a value proposition, and we're not going to talk about that, but that's really, really critical in selling anything, in influencing and persuading. How to develop that would be a skill, okay? Skill to develop. Now, motivation, and this is what Tracy's comment was, to draw audience interest into Toastmasters would be a motivational example. Why not look at the participants' websites? And this speaks to what Stephen was talking about, getting them to think about their own efforts up to now, and especially whether they've looked at the value chain across the 4 platforms we spoke about earlier. And empathy, of course, emotional intelligence, that's somewhere between skill and motivation. So we would build training around these activities. We'll create some activities around them, and we'll talk about that more. Environment is something you may not want to train, and that would be like the decision of the platform that the club is using in order to interact with their audience. So as I mentioned, Kathy Moore has got this in a flowchart that's available. The link is in your handout. She's written this book called Mapit. She's an expert in this. She's a video. There's videos on YouTube. I also have a link to that. If you're interested in this as an expert and advanced, and you want to do this and what I'm doing here today with you, then do watch those. Those are excellent resources. Well, guess what? Yours truly was given this exact same challenge back in January. And I was to deliver the second COT training for VPPR. I built a team around me, of course, Ruben, Mr. Smiles there. And I asked a subject matter expert, we call them SMEs in the training industry, subject matter expert, Carolyn Klee, she's in the social media world. And Chizuru is a member in our club, and she talked about stickiness, how to make things sticky. She has a very interesting slant on it, and I invited her to speak to that for about 5 minutes. So Carolyn had a session for 5 minutes, and for the hour and a half, we did this. So anyways, this is how I opened with this microstory. Bob is a VP PR of a very successful club. And he and his executive have organized a club that not only has it got vibrant meetings, but it has members who are reaching their goals. Their president's distinguished. They have incredible social, great spirit. And in addition to that, when guests come to those meetings, they see that vibrancy, they see the organization, the professionalism, and they want to join almost immediately. So the club is growing leaps and bounds. Of course, COVID hits us in 2020, and the enthusiasm starts to wane in the club. The online meetings are now less organized. 50% of the club members do not renew. And in fact, the district's numbers are 50%. And this is a number back in February. The numbers since jumped up. So here's the question. I'm having trouble attracting new guests to our meetings. And his executive is putting pressure on Bob. We got to do something. So what can Bob do to attract more guests to a virtual meeting? Now, before you start typing into the chat, I want you to step back. That's an example of a microstory. A microstory in 6 slides. Now, remember we talked about anecdote. There's no ending. As an anecdote would have some kind of conclusion, whether it's humor, whether it's in the fable, it's some kind of point of reflection, a teaching. But here, we don't have an ending. We had a question. Why is the microstory effective? So type into the chat, how did it affect you? And why do you think it's effective in a training session? Everyone can relate to the story. Exactly. There's a story that's common to everyone's experience. And that speaks to what Stephen's comment was earlier. You want to set up the story so that it is relatable to everyone who is participating. Ruben, what else do we have? Everything's flying by me.
As you're talking about, Stevens mentioned that it leaves the audience thinking, what's next?
Correct. Curiosity is huge, right? We want to create the curiosity that kills the cat. And that's so easy to do with the 6 slides. Go ahead.
So we're talking about the microstory itself. It's short and easy to follow. So, and to put into practice, allows to draw people into the situation. Laurie is mentioning that we may have had similar experiences. So I guess it's relatable in that way. You tell a story that speaks to everyone is what Kathy is mentioning. So it's delivered in small tidbits.
I'd like to pick up on what Laurie said. This is very important. In fact, there's kind of a subconscious effect here. And let's go into that psychology part. Everybody brings some different experiences to the training session. And why would you want to train and stand up and be the sage on the stage when half the people in the audience might already know or know better the information? Why not dip into people's experiences, which varies? It's a continuum. We have novices here today. We have advanced people. Why not ask those people who have something interesting to say on a topic, invite them to basically satisfy that curiosity that we have? I'm curious to find out who the advanced person is, and we haven't got time to do that today, but the curiosity is huge. So we've established curiosity. To satisfy it, we need to get the answers, the range of answers that are available in our audience, in our participants, in our learners. So that's fantastic. Great comment. And the tidbits, very good. Okay. Well, let's take a look at how to build a microstory. What I did was I introduced a character. Now, it's not the main character. It's a character that starts this microstory. It's the beginning of the microstory. And then I created a scenario, if you recall. And I introduced the guest. Now, in this case, in this microstory, the guest is really important. It doesn't play a huge role. It's just going to show up in a second. But he becomes the fulcrum of the entire microstory. Now, we describe the current state. The happy medium, nothing's broken, everybody's having a good time, and it's great, okay? And then something hits us. It's something that's going to change drastically the current state. And people are leaving, people are not coming, and then we present the challenge to our audience, to our learners. Why? Because we want to get the answer from them. We're not giving them the answer. We're getting the answer, as we just spoke about, from the participants. Now, the first part is called the setup. We're getting like, what have I got here? I put 8 slides here to break it up, right? But you can see the setup. And what's really important in the setup is the context. This is really important. In the minimal number of slides, you've got characters, you've got a setup, you've got a context, which is the scenario, and you've got to paint the current state. Then you introduce the critical event, the change event. And finally, this is really important. You're giving an opportunity for the participants to reflect, the reflect stage. All right. Now, if you have any questions on this, just type them into chat. Ruben will keep those for the Q&A. Now, during the training session in February, I had another microstory, and you can do multiple microstories in a training session. And that story, and we've sort of talked about it already, was that value chain, the chain from Toastmasters International down to the meeting. are the expectations that are set at the beginning confirmed or refuted by Bill, the visitor? And if they're refuted, you know what it's like to come to your first Toastmaster meeting. Anxiety sets in, and Bill has a simple decision. Do I stay or do I go? And most of them leave. Well, let's take a look at that story in our process here. Bill's the character. He went to the international website. He saw the values that it portrays, set the expectations. He sees that it's in those values are reflected in the club website, goes to a meeting. In the meeting, the activity, the action is maybe disorganized. Maybe people are talking over each other. Maybe the meeting isn't a very productive meeting. And it's refuted in his mind, and he sets in that with that anxiety. He doesn't show up. And that might be the answer that Bob is challenged with. Why are people not joining and not coming? For the reflection, the trainer can say, what can we do to change the situation? How do we change it? How does the training that we're going to talk about today make it so that the outcome is positive? Now I'm going to ask you, I said I was going to give you a couple of tidbits, and Patricia Fripp last week, she analyzed 5 speeches. I only have 3 of the speakers on this slide. What did Patricia Fripp say were the 3 S's for story structure? Now, I will give a prize. I will actually buy a prize and deliver it myself if anybody can tell me, except you, Antoinette, because you know the answer. Anyone else can just unmute themselves and say, what are the 3 S's for story structure? And the reason I can take that risk, I bet you people will start Googling it if I said I'd give you $1 million. The reason I say this is it slipped by very quickly, but it's one of the key fulcrums that she measures people's speeches with, and she does a lot of her feedback based on the 3 S's. The 3 S's, believe it or not, can fit into what we're talking about today. In the setup context, she talked about situation. In the critical event and reflection, she talked about solutions. And these two together and the resolution leads to success. So she was advising that if you paint the proper situation, you provide the challenge and the solution, and then paint the success that follows from the solution, then you've got a winning from good to great speech. And this is really important, that not only is she advocating what we're seeing here today, but it's what you can use, and what you're hearing today, you can use in speeches, you can use in the workshops, in the training, in the small trainings. You can even actually use this formula in your table topics. What magic. So although nobody won the prize, you've got all this information that's worth more than any prize I could buy for you. Excellent. All right, let's look at this workshop. What opening microstory did I start with? Well, I had Anne as the character at the beginning. I described the scenario, the challenge she's facing. Bring in the second character who's important. And within the second character, she needs to deal with her challenge. What is she going to do? And for you, I asked, make me a decision, A, B, or C. There was no answer. Yes, take a picture of, this will be available on the district website, so you'll be able to review this again. And of course, you'll be able to do pictures of all the slides there. So the microstory sets up the reflection. As opposed to the anecdote that we talked about, it completes the story. And we want to create the curiosity through the microstory in order to determine what the reflection is. Now, we've looked at 3 different reflections, 3 different interaction points that you can create. And when I asked, what can Bob do to attract more guests to a virtual meeting? We are basically saying, soliciting for ideas. suggestions, solutions, and practices. Now, why is this important? You can take the list of suggestions that people are giving you in the chat and maybe send people to a breakout room and have them analyze their suggestions, rank them. Maybe those with more experience can give examples of practices that they use. You can do a lot of things as a trainer with this list of ideas. In the second example, we created a consequence scenario for your learners to reflect upon. The negative, if things don't change, you can ask them a bunch of questions about that. And then the positive, where do you want them to go? And have them give you suggestions, all that range of expertise in the room, have them give you examples as you're giving me today of a positive consequence. And the third one, the decision. Have your learner make the decision. They have to reflect. They have to stay quiet for a second and think. And that creates interactivity. That means that they're engaged. It's not a blah, blah, blah. They're coming up with their answer. So they're giving options, just as you did today in the chat. And we can talk about those as we are doing back and forth. So this is really important. And this is the crux of today's workshop. We're going to move to something else. But before we do, I just want to summarize and say that with simple Microstory, you are framing what your training is going to be like, what will happen. You can have multiple activities follow your Microstory, and the Microstory can be as simple as 2, 4, 6 slides. Create the curiosity in your students, and then ask the important interactive question where the answers can be provided in the chat, the poll, or in, if we had more time, in discussion. And I'd love to have more time with all of you because you guys are so engaged, but it would turn into the 3-hour workshop that we said we didn't want today. All right, let's now talk to Antoinette. And Antoinette is with the Oshawa Toastmasters Club. She's been a Toastmaster since 2018, and she's been a VPPR for 2 years. Antoinette joined us in the workshop in February. Do you remember her, Ruben?
Of course I do, yes.
And what do you remember her for best? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Well, I remember her for, I remember throughout the question period when she asked to, essentially she asked for more information, and we stayed a bit longer with her even after the workshop to have some discussion. And I believe that it didn't even end there because I believe that you had even more of an interaction with her even after that. But I do remember her clearly for staying.
Yes. Wow, what a segue. Thank you, Ruben. Yes, I followed up with Antoinette about 2 weeks later. And the reason I did was I looked at people's websites and I saw a drastic change in the Oshawa Toastmasters webpage. Antoinette took the suggestions that we talked to her about and made some important changes. And so at this point, I want to introduce Antoinette. Say hello.
Hello.
There we go. Fabulous. You sound great today. Could you maybe share with us, how did you find, what was your experience like in attending the workshop back in February?
The experience was very exciting. I got a lot of knowledge. I got a lot of information. There was a lot of interaction in the workshop. There was clear this indication of what you're going to be talking about. So you had the agenda. I knew exactly what was going to be happening. For me, I came in with a concern that, as you mentioned, I'm the VP of PR, and we were losing a lot of members through online virtual learning. And we weren't getting guests coming in either. So I wanted to really have that addressed and those questions answered for me as to why I wasn't getting any traction.
That's great.
And yeah, you answered it.
Let me interrupt there for a second. To Stephen's point, it's very difficult to know who your audience is going to be and what level of knowledge they're coming into. And so you have to, I try to create generic type questions that would create the interactivity, the curiosity, and the questions that Antoinette, who had something that she came to the training with, was able to share that with the group. And so you can make it inclusive. And with that, I'm going to go to the next question. Antoinette, are you still there? I see her, she's frozen. I asked her in the interview so I did an interview with Antoinette 2 weeks later, and I asked her what did she remember of the Microstory? And I wish you could hear her answer this because it's really important. She said, I don't remember. Oh,
Antoinette's coming back.
Let her say it. Antoinette, what do you remember? What do you recall of the initial Microstory? Or back to
Just give her some time to connect. All right.
Antoinette, what do you remember of the Microstory that introduced in the workshop?
When we spoke last time, I had said I honestly didn't remember the actual Microstory itself, but I remembered stats and some points that you made. But I didn't remember the characters or the story. But I remember the points that you made, like 50%, and that engaged me. That I remember thinking, oh, okay, this is about me. I need to learn this and listen to this.
So this is really important. It's not like you're trying to make this a fable and they're going to remember all the details. You're creating the curiosity that we talked about. You're creating kind of a subconscious pull of the learners into the problem that they're experiencing. You want to pull them into their world and have them think about their world, not about the goofy story, but the story sets it up for their thinking, for their contemplation, for the reflection on their life challenges to occur. So the story itself is not important. It's the effect of the story on the internal. And it was very effective. It turned out the statistic, if you can use a statistic or some form of in the consequence, something that's drastically challenging, then your audience is going to come with you. So finally, in the last question I have for you, Antoinette, at the end, what did you decide you were going to do? What motivated you? Can you talk about the motivation that the workshop gave you for action after the meeting?
I think just the points that you were talking about. So you were saying add value to your website so that guests come in and then they realize how this is beneficial for them. I think before what I was doing, I was just putting up information on the website and not really realizing the point of it. And then through the workshop, I realized that, okay, everything has to have a reason and a benefit to the guest coming. And that's when I just got really excited about it. And I went back to my website and I just sort of changed a bunch of things and made sure everything was there for a reason. I looked at it from a guest perspective, what they were looking for and what I could give them.
Fantastic. Give Antoinette a big round of virtual applause. And Kathy, you can put up that clapping hand again. Fantastic. Thank you. All right. So Q&A. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kara. All right. Write your questions into chat. Ruben will be looking at that. And while you're writing questions into the chat, I'm going to review one more item that's really important. And that's how do you map your activities through the workshop? So we're back to the training goals. We understand what the need is. And what do we have? We have 10 minutes left. Okay, good. So we got enough time for this review and the questions. All right, we're going to map our training session. Okay, we're going to have to put some knowledge out there for people. And, you know, I talked about the stickiness and Chizuru talked about the stickiness. We had Carolyn talk about what brand is and all the components that go into a brand. And then I suggested to everybody to look at the job aid, you know, further if they're interested in those topics, not unlike what we've been talking about today. Then for the majority of the workshop, I looked at and reviewed the different websites. And then we're really curious. Then each of the participants really wanted to know what each other's websites look like. And of course, I knew who was coming to the training because I was given the roster of participants a couple days before. I spent a little time in discussing value proposition, but in the context of the websites. Most websites don't have value proposition statements, not the proper ones, but one did, and I could use that as an example, and that's very effective. I talked about the use of photos, Toastmaster standards, we did polls and chats, and discussion and a Q&A. And so you could see all the interactive points in this training session so that we could engage, connect and engage and involve our audience. All this was the majority of the training session. And it's introduced with the Microstory. The Microstory that introduced the challenge, consequences, and also introduced the guest perspective. Now, why is this important? And this is for the third time today. It creates the frame that the training is going to be delivered in. In fact, it's what we talked about, creates the curiosity that the framed training is delivering on, is trying to satisfy. All right. So, Ruben, do we have any questions?
We do have questions. So from Tracy, she's asking if each microstory should only address one issue of problem.
The beautiful thing about microstories is you don't know where the participants are going to take you. Yes, you might have one purpose, but the responses that come back from the audience, the participants, the learners, are going to tell you where you need to take the training session in what directions. And so you end up thinking, okay, I was going to go in this direction over here, but they're asking me all these questions about, for example, brand, right? How do I develop brand? And all of a sudden you start spending more time on brand than possibly what's the purpose of photography or photos, or what kind of photos, so on. So yeah, you might start with the intention of one problem or challenge that you want to address, but actually it opens up the discussion to multiple.
Perfect. The next question is coming from Letitia. Could you please share an example of how you use microstories at work?
Ruben, this was your question to me last time. I'm going to tell you something that impressed upon me. I mean, there's multiple things I can say, but there was a speech that someone did in our club about a year ago. And within the speech, there was embedded a 2-line sentence that was perfect for a training and a microstory. And the speaker said, my boss came back from a manager's meeting and explained to our team the commitment that she made to the business, to the VPs. He said, and that's all you need to say. One sentence. Can you see the microstory in that? The power, right? You put that together in 2 or 3 slides, and I think you can pull it off in 1 slide. Actually, 2 slides. You'd want to do the reflection question. And right there, you're discussing the interaction with your management, the interaction with your team. I mean, it could just lead you to go into so many different directions. This is powerful stuff, folks. Go ahead, Ruben.
Yeah. So Kathy has a scenario for you. So you get new members to join the club even during the pandemic. After several weeks, they start not coming to the club meetings. How would you solve this situation with your microstory?
So we could do a microstory within the club. Take 10, 15 minutes at the end, maybe do a table topics, and you put out the question, you do your microstory, and you ask for your team members to provide the answers to the consequence, right? So you got a negative consequence. What's the positive consequence? How do we move the club to a new platform? I hope that answers it. We've basically come to the end, and I'm going to do a quick summary of what we reviewed today. We talked about the decision right up front, and that's how I engaged you into this workshop. And I talked about in that story the different resources and information that's available to us on the topic. And rather than stand at the front of the stage and do the sage on the stage, Why not put most of that information as a resource that people can draw on and just teach them how to get to those resources and links? And the important question in designing the workshop: why are people not doing the target behavior that we want them to do? If you start looking at that, you start to realize what actions, what activities you want them to practice in order to be able to do the main goal activity. And if it's to increase the number of people coming to your club meetings based on the eyeballs on your website, this is the training program that I designed. We talked about how to design the story and the power that the microstory has for creating a reflection moment. And we said there were 3 types of reflections or major interactive points in your training sessions: ideas, consequences, decision. You can't design a microstory without understanding what the goal of the training is. And that's pretty well the key crux of this webinar, this training. And then we looked at how to design the training session itself. Follows quite logically. I hope this is a simple version for something that you might be able to implement yourself. And you know that if it's done well, you're going to influence your learners to do what you're hoping the goal training focus objective is. Well, all of us at the end of the training want to see these wonderful words. Anne says to Maxine, the feedback was fantastic for your workshop training. Thank you, Maxine. Thank you. And from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of my team, I want to say thank you today for participating in this workshop. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Take what you've learned, implement some of the ideas in your next table topic, your next speech, and I hope I've encouraged you to do a training workshop to practice this. Seek out our Speaking from Experience Events Toastmasters Club. We do a workshop every month, the second Wednesday of every month. Go to our website. You'll find those in the notes below. And we encourage you to visit us and participate in our future workshops. And with that, back to you, Ruben, and your last comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roman, for this workshop. It was very insightful, really a lot of knowledge that came into it. So again, jazz hand, thank you very much. So I want to leave you with the comments. So please leave us your feedback. I've put the survey link, the SurveyMonkey link in the description. I see the question from Letitia about attending more workshops. So we'll post the link for our for the SFEET club, where we have workshop like this one every month. And again, I want to thank you, Roman. If there's one thing that I take away from this is that as well, learning from this workshop, yes, when you tell stories, you find out that stories are powerful, but micro stories are memorable. And it's in being memorable that you can really make an impact and get people to act upon what they learn in the workshop. So thank you very much.